Hi guys, Elizabeth Blackstock here, US editor over at planetf1.com, and I'm taking the reins today at the F1 word because I think it's time we talk about Lewis Hamilton. Specifically, why this move to Ferrari just has not worked out for him. I have 5 big reasons to explain Hamilton's struggle, but first, I want to talk about the F1 2025 season so far. As things currently stand after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton sits 7th in the World Drivers' Championship with just 33 points to his name. He had a tough start to the year in Australia, where he got into a verbal sparring match with his race engineer, but things looked like they were turning around in China. There, Hamilton dominated the Shanghai sprint race from pole position and seemingly put to bed the idea that Ferrari just wasn't a good fit for him, only to be disqualified from the Grand Prix itself for excessive skid plank wear. Since then, his best finish has been 5th in Bahrain, which was sandwiched between 2 7th-place finishes at either end of the season's first triple header. After the most recent race in Saudi Arabia, Hamilton sounded beat. He said that there were 0 positives for the team at Jeddah, that the race was horrible, and that he has no idea why his performance has slipped. Even worse, he told media after the race that there's really no immediate fix to these problems, so he's expecting the rest of the year to be just as painful. But is there really no explanation for Hamilton's issues at Ferrari? I think there are, and I have 5 reasons why this year is shaping up to be such a mess for the 7-time champ. First and foremost, Lewis Hamilton's struggles didn't start with his move to Ferrari. They started with the reintroduction of ground effect. Basically, ground effect is the name for the aerodynamic force that's created between the floor of a race car and the asphalt underneath it. If the floor is designed in a very specific way, it can create a negative pressure area or a vacuum beneath the car that sucks it closer to the road for more downforce. The original ground effect concepts in F1 were banned decades ago, but the FIA brought back a revised version with its regulations that it implemented in 2022. When ground effect was reintroduced, the whole goal was that it should reduce the big performance gaps between the top-tier teams and the backmarkers. In reality, we've just kind of seen a lot of big problems. If you remember back in 2022, a lot of teams, especially Mercedes, suffered from the porpoising phenomenon, where the ground effect would suck the car to the racing surface for just a moment, then let go, then suck the car down again, and then let go again. The drivers were rattling around in the cockpit, and that issue has largely been solved, but because ground effect is reduced when a car slows down, it means that these new cars still handle differently in the corners compared to their predecessors. Namely, the grip shifts from the rear of the car to the front as the car goes through the corner, which means drivers can end up understeering or losing stability partway through that corner. Lewis Hamilton developed his driving style way prior to the introduction of ground effect. When he dives into a corner, he likes to do so late on the brakes, and he also likes to make minute directional adjustments with the steering wheel as he goes. If you add in ground effect, though, this driving style is way more difficult to manage. He isn't finding stability in the corners the same way he used to. If you've listened to Lewis Hamilton's post-race interviews this year, you'll hear him repeating a lot of the same things. He lacked balance. He lacked grip. He had to fight his Ferrari through the corners. He couldn't feel his Ferrari underneath him. These are all signs that he's having a tough time with the very concept of ground effect. It was already tough for him at Mercedes, and it hasn't gotten any easier now that he's swapped to a new team. The second reason Lewis Hamilton might be struggling, the start to the year has been brutal. We've had 5 races in 6 weeks, with exactly 1 weekend off since the Australian Grand Prix, and we've had a ton of difficult circuits to start the year. For some drivers, that's great. They love being able to take the lessons they learned from one race and apply them immediately to the next race. They are thriving. But there are other drivers who like to have a chance to digest everything first. They like to consult the data and ask questions and talk to the team members involved in the areas where they might be struggling. They probably also like to have a day or two where they don't have to think about all of the mistakes they made in the last Grand Prix. That can be important for the whole process of learning. Now, I'm not Lewis Hamilton, so I can't say for certain what type of person he is, but I do know that many of the drivers pointed out how tough the start of this year has been. After Saudi Arabia, pretty much the entire grid admitted that they were glad they'd have a weekend to decompress and refocus. And I can only imagine that's even more important for the drivers and teams who have really struggled so far. Whether one weekend is actually enough to make any substantial changes is a conversation for another day. But with 5 races done, there is at least a decent enough pool of data for those drivers to work from in sorting out issues heading into the rest of the year. And maybe Hamilton will find something that he can change heading into Miami. With almost a century of history to its name, Scuderia Ferrari carries some steep expectations and some very specific traditions. And that new environment could be the third reason why Lewis Hamilton is having a tough go of 2025. Luca Del Monte, one of Enzo Ferrari's biographers, phrased it best. In Italy, there was the Pope, and then there was Enzo. We may have lost the team's eponymous founder in the late 1980s, but that sense of grandiosity and expectation has remained with the team ever since. Italian motorsport is synonymous with Ferrari, and Ferrari is synonymous with passion, speed, and, admittedly, hard-headedness. Enzo Ferrari was one of the last holdouts on the mid-engined F1 revolution because, in his words, the horse doesn't push the cart, which means the engine shouldn't push the chassis. That revolution was decades ago, but the stubborn belief that the guy in charge of Scuderia Ferrari is always right has kind of defined the team for better or for worse ever since. In 2025, Ferrari is admittedly a lot different than it was in the past. Team principal Fred Vasseur has introduced a more relaxed leadership style, which isn't dictated by the whims of his emotion. But he's only one man, and the foundations of the team are still built on that passion for racing that sometimes also means getting a little blindsided by your emotion. It's a big change from the more calculated but open management style that Lewis Hamilton knew at Mercedes. And since he joined that team in 2013, right when it was getting off the ground, it was a management style that Lewis helped found. If you've ever moved from one job to a different one with a wildly different company culture, you know exactly how long it can take to adapt. And that brings me to my fourth big reason. This is something that I've written about before over on planetf1.com, and there were quite a few people who really did not like it. But the fact of the matter is, Lewis Hamilton is still in the throes of a learning curve. I want to ask you guys a question. Have you ever swapped employers but still had to do the same job? Maybe you were a car salesman who went from selling Audis to Fords, or you're a writer like me who moved from one publication to another. Did you adapt immediately? I'm betting the answer here is no, because even though you might technically be doing the same thing you've already done in the past, there are always enough differences to keep you on your toes. You can be an expert in your field and still have to learn email etiquette, how to talk to your boss, and all of the unspoken expectations that dictate the flow of a workspace. It takes a while before that stuff is second nature, and under the pressures of Formula One, everyone kind of expects you to adapt instantly. That's not always the case. We might be 5 races into the season, but Lewis Hamilton is still very likely in this phase of his tenure at Ferrari. He's learning how to communicate with Fred Vasseur and how to compete alongside Charles Leclerc. He's getting used to a new car that he didn't have input in designing, and he's learning how to work with new crew members, including his race engineer. Plus, he just moved to an Italian organization without speaking a lick of the language. These are all factors that just kind of take time to get used to, especially if you've spent so long doing these exact same things in a very specific and different way somewhere else. Now, my final reason here might be a little controversial, but hear me out. There are a lot of naysayers out there who are quick to claim that Lewis Hamilton is struggling because he's just not cut out for Formula One anymore. And while I disagree with a lot of their reasons, I do think they might be on the right track. Those naysayers generally point to Hamilton's age to argue that he's too old for Formula One, or they'll claim that actually Lewis was never good and that his success was all down to the car. I do not subscribe to any of those beliefs, but I do think Lewis Hamilton may very well be reevaluating the role that F1 plays in his life. On top of his 7 drivers' championships, Hamilton has also become a celebrity that has transcended the world of car racing. He's a co-chair of the Met Gala, which is probably the world's biggest and most influential fashion event ever. He's a producer of the new F1 film starring Brad Pitt, and also admitted that he was really disappointed he didn't get a chance to star in Top Gun: Maverick because filming would have conflicted with his racing schedule. He founded Mission 44, an organization designed to encourage folks to achieve their goals in disciplines where they've been critically underrepresented. He's a partial owner of the Denver Broncos NFL franchise, and he has more brand deals than I can name here. Some people might see those diverse accomplishments and claim that they only highlight the fact that Hamilton is trying to be in too many places all at once, and that therefore means he's not giving his all to Formula One anymore. But I think we can look at that in a different light. Lewis Hamilton maybe now sees himself as more than an F1 driver. Motorsport is just one star in the constellation of interests that define his global recognition, and maybe it's no longer the one that brings him the most fulfillment. Let me return to that new job analogy I brought up before. Sometimes you leave your job because you feel stuck, and you think a change of scenery might be just what you need to get that pep in your step again. But sometimes you move to that new employer and realize it wasn't just your old boss or your old workflow that was driving you crazy. It was actually the very nature of the job itself. You might realize it's time to do something totally different, but you wouldn't have known that if you hadn't tried going to a new employer. Maybe F1 just isn't doing it for Lewis Hamilton anymore, and maybe it took the move to Ferrari to figure that out. Of course, there can be any number of reasons why Hamilton is finding the Ferrari transition a tough one, and if you've got your own theories, I want to hear them down in the comments. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the F1 Word, and head over to planetf1.com to check out more deep dives in the motorsport space. Thank y'all for joining me today. I've been Elizabeth Blackstock, and I'll see you next time.